Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566, or you can text 45645. Coming in the fall of 2023 in Canada, you can also call 988, just three numbers. You can also call the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. And the Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. In the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not need to be alone. Welcome to the We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our family's journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections, building on strengths, and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a father to two wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. We want you to feel like you have power and hope. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations, on whose territories I live, work, and play.
I advocated for Isaac way different than I advocate for the kids that I work with. Not in my of advocacy, but how I went about it. Isaac, we pulled from school and we homeschooled him, and then we unschooled him rather than fight the system. Whereas the kids that I work with, typically, some of them are actually homeschooled, but still sort of working within the system. And so I advocate sort of in the system for them. But it's different than what I did for Isaac, because I had the capacity to be able to homeschool him, and a lot of support for that. Whereas a lot of families don't have that option, or don't want, or don't think they're up to it, or don't want to take that option, right? There's like a lot of different layers to that, on what is going to meet the family's needs. But for us, I took Isaac out of the system, and people actually questioned me about it at the time. Like, why didn't I stay in and fight the fight in the system for him? And mostly I didn't, because I didn't think me fighting the system would serve him well at that point. Because the system never served him well. So I didn't think just extra supports or whatever were going to actually change it enough for him to make it successful for him.
So that part of me wants to ask you another question about that, but I might come back to it afterwards. But what do you feel the current state of? What do you feel the current state of? I mean, I wrote the question. The way I wrote the question down was, what do you feel the current state of your causes in today? But what do you feel the current state of, the work that you do is in? And by current state, I mean, what do you see going on around you that is either good or bad?
Yeah. Or neutral. Yeah. So I see kids getting left behind. Like, not in like a grade level, because they push kids along in the grades no matter what happens. But I see kids not getting the services that they need. Even if on paper, like even if in the IEP it says they're supposed to have these 5 things, especially once you start to get into the older grades, it almost never happens. And if you want it to happen, you have to be in there strongly advocating for it all the time. And most parents either don't have the capacity or the time or the energy, or sometimes they don't even know that the accommodations aren't accommodations. The tools have not been put in place, right? So it's hard, because a lot of the families that I work with, the parents also have ADHD or something else, other stuff going on, that they're not able to be strong advocates. And the school is not advocating for those children. They are not. because it's more work. It's more, right? There's so many things that play into it. And I think it depends on the school and the teacher and like, there's just so many moving parts.
Yeah, I think you and I talked about this, but I know I've brought this up to other people in our circle before, is that to me, I think it's a system very much where there's supposedly rules and nobody really follows the rules, and people sort of make things up, and there's no rules that anybody's willing to send anybody. And it's it's basically a game where the rules are changing on the whim of somebody else. We'll do sort of what we can. And I think I just want to put a bit of sympathy on the teachers and the EAs and stuff, because they're probably handcuffed as well, and there's only so much that they can sit there and do. And God knows I know enough EAs where I see them trying as well. And that's that I think I think it's unfortunate that that's the way the system sort of is. And it's not, I hate to say it's not uncommon, but it's not uncommon. Um, do do you see the I, I guess, do you see the disability community as fractured or aligned?
It is so fractured. And I think it's fractured on purpose, because every different distinct group has to fight for funding. They have to fight for funding. And the only people that they have to fight for funding is other groups with funding, right? Like currently, autism has a lot of funding attached to it generally, right? For individual kids, for stuff in the classrooms, right? There tends to be more funding. For a long time, it was kids with Down syndrome got so much support in the schools because they had strong advocates. And then the autism community came along, and they also had very strong advocates. But they didn't put more funding into the pool for everybody. They just made people fight over the pool of funding. That new model that they were going to use with the sort of clearinghouse in, I can't remember where they were going to put the building. Anyways, and even if you didn't have a diagnosis, you could go in and get services. And it really fractured communities because autism parents were fighting against it because they weren't going to add more funding. They were going to take the pool of funding and then just divide it up again amongst a bunch more families. So all these families were going to lose their funding and their providers and all the things that it's taken them years to set up. Then people outside of that, with kids with no diagnosis or a diagnosis that's not fundable, all they saw was these autism parents fighting to keep their funding, not realizing that there wasn't going to be more funding, that people were going to be losing funding here. They weren't adding any more to the pot, right? And it caused so much anger and pain and caused people to fight against each other where we never should have been fighting against each other, right? Yeah. But they set it up like that. The government, hands down, set it up like that.
Well, I think the other thing too to point out is that it's just something that's been it's been carried along for decades, right? Again, like you were saying earlier, the way the Down syndrome community had funding and then sort of shifted autism as to that side of it, like that's gone on for for a very long time. And I think it's more a case of more the same, just changing it around, and now we're going to put everybody into one big group, and now we're going to just fight over it again in a different format. No, that's not helping things. What I get my 2-in-1 question: what components need to change, and do you think this is a hard problem to solve?
I think if
and I guess what I mean by that is, as far as bringing everybody back together to the table, that community that we do have, because I think we should refer to, whether it's Down syndrome, autism, all ADHD, any we want to be. I think we want to be one. What components do you think need to change to allow that? And do you think that's a hard issue to solve? What would bring everybody to the table?
I think to start with, we need to put people with common sense in charge of it. That's what we need to do. Not politicians that are just after the optics, because that's what that whole center was about the optics, not about actually getting kids services. It was about the optics of look at this great thing that we're doing. So I think you need people in there with a lot of common sense. And I think overall, they need somebody that's outside of the government actually driving it. Right? So like keep politicians out of it. Because I think for the most part, not that I think some of them aren't trying to do their best, but I think most of them don't understand. And for them, it's like a large picture program, right? It's not about individual people, but it very much is to parents and caregivers. It's about individual people, not about everybody.
Do you think it makes a difference if that politician has got a child that has autism or that has ADHD or has Down syndrome? Do you think that makes a difference on who's running the show?
Yeah, I think it does make a difference. I think also they're going to be coming at it from a bit of a different angle, because I'm going to assume if they're a politician, they can pay for stuff that they won't get funding for, where most of the families that I work with can't pay for things outside of the funding, where they don't have the extra, right? So I think when you're coming at it as somebody that has the money to be able to do the extra things for your child, you're coming at it from a different angle.
That's coming from a place of privilege, for that matter, too.
It's very much coming from a place of privilege. It's also coming from a place of diagnosis privilege, because it's so hard to get diagnosis, like through the school system. As you know, through the school system, it's super hard. Even just when there's before school age, even when they're sort of in infant development and toddler program stuff, super hard unless you have money. If you have money, you can go after a diagnosis.
And you can go after the diagnosis multiple times. You don't like one provider, you go to the other provider and you sit there and you find someone else. Maybe there's something that gets disagreed with. And I know that was for us when we brought Owen through, I won't name the place, for his initial autism assessment, which is what we thought we had. And I again believe that that's the case. The person that did the assessment was using words at the end like, Owen's, I remember it, Owen's a unique little boy, she's writing in the report, and I'm like, unique's not a word that's quantifiable, for the love of God. Like it bugs me now. At the time, my wife and I were just so wiped emotionally that we didn't understand how to advocate for these things. If it was me now back then, I wish I could put myself back in time and just have a go at it. Because it still bothers me years later. Anyways,
there's all sorts of stuff in that. There is all sorts of stuff in that. So when my sister and brother-in-law had to get my niece diagnosed, she languished on the school waiting list for, get this, 6 years.
I believe it. Yeah.
6 years, because she was never a behavior issue. She did not have behavior issues. My nephew, on the other hand, who had a huge behavior issue in the classroom, I got diagnosed within a year. But my niece not. So they finally put out and paid for the diagnosis. The psychologist that did it would not put down that she has dyscalculia, which means she can't do math, because that might hinder her getting into university someday. So what it meant was she had to do regular math classes the entire way through. Still cannot do math beyond a grade 3 level, and will often cry. As an adult, she's an adult and will cry if you ask her to do a math question in her head, because she cannot do it. Right? Not the lack of time. for lack of whatever, but he would not put dyscalculia down on the thing because that might hinder her getting into college. And we're like, that's the last thing we're worried about right now.
Yeah.
Right. So she got no services for that.
That which it bugs me so much. You know what? It comes down to, you know, we're talking beforehand, like again, the tools and the calculators. It's like, my God, if someone who doesn't have, who's not autistic or doesn't have some sort of neurodevelop, you know, ND factor about them, like, sorry, I shouldn't have used the acronym there, the neurodevelopmental factor there. That's what I meant by ND.
Yep.
You know, if you give a regular person a calculator, oh, no big deal. But you give one to somebody else, and all of a sudden, you know, that does have those challenges. Then it's like, or it's an iPad or something like it. All of a sudden, we're bending. You know, it's seen as bending over backwards.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not right at all. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think speech to text and text to speech, we don't put that in place for kids until they can already write. Why are we doing that? Like, why do we make them suffer through that just so that they can earn a tool that they should be entitled to?
Exactly. Yep. And it's funny because when my son was in grade 2 last year, that's exactly what I had pushed forward with him. And I can't remember how I found the app. It was called SnapType. And you could take a picture of the sheet that you were working on, then you go onto the iPad, and then it's awesome app. And I just bought the version, and I told the school and the SBT, and I'm like, you guys need to buy this. It's a $6 app, for the love of God. Like, just buy it. And they did. And I know Owen uses that. His other teacher did. And that was huge because now he's no longer behind. He can keep up with them. And I'm sorry, but the thing that gets me the most is the simple, when you really strip things away and you say, okay, let's take the word horse. Okay. How many ways can we put together the word horse in terms of writing? You can do speech to text. You can do typing. You could use a pen and paper. You could use chalk with a marker on a board. You could use, what's it called? You could use blocks to symbolize the picture of the horse. It's all a damn horse. So what does it matter how we get there?
Yeah. No, I agree. I totally agree. I use SnapType all the time with my kiddos. It's so much easier for a lot of kids. For Isaac, when he did have to fill things out, I use it. I use SnapType. If I have to fill out a form and send it someplace, I upload it into SnapType, fill it out, sign it, send it off. It's a great app.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Okay, so question, because you and I probably could go down this path real easy. And keep going. When you think about, but this leads really well into it. When you think about homelessness or addiction, unemployment, what is one factor that you want to see addressed in childhood that would prevent those kind of future problems? And the example I'll give you, and I can't remember who I was talking about that gave me this stat, but I should find out who it was. The example was not being able to read was an indicator that you're more likely to die of an overdose. So taking that into account, I think I remember who it was. She was a music therapist. I know it's hard to choose one factor or one thing. You can put it in a list and make it priority if you want, or you can just do a even playing field. But what things do you think need to be addressed in that childhood portion?
I think we need to start addressing with all kids, not just our kids that are a little bit different, that have different learning styles. I think in kindergarten or preschool, we need to start giving them access to all of the tools that we have. So in kindergarten, they can learn that if the lights feel too bright, they can wear these glasses. If the sounds are too much, they can put on headphones. If they need to move, they can sit on a wobble cushion or like a ball. If they need to go someplace dark or swing or whatever they need to do to regulate themselves, to keep themselves emotionally regulated. These are the tools we have. Use all of them. And people's argument is always, well, that would be chaos. And then kids would use stuff they don't need. I don't think that's true.
That's not true at all.
Kids would gravitate to the things that they really need. Whether or not they have a diagnosis, it shouldn't matter if they have access to those things. And kids will learn what works for them. It also will normalize it, right? So that even the kids that don't need any of those things, because it's just always been a part of their school thing, they will think nothing of it during school. And when they get into the workforce or real life, they also will think nothing about somebody wearing pink glasses indoors or headphones or sitting on a chair, right? It just becomes part of everyday life. And I think if that's the way we approach it, that these are all the tools that are available to everybody all the time, pick what you need. Kids will figure out what they need.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think the other thing too is that what gets me is I think it discounts kids, and it discounts just how, oh God, what's the word I want to use? Willing, I think is the word, or you know what? They just see it as part of a normal thing. Oh, okay, little Johnny needs to have the light off, and okay, cool, the light's off. We preach so much about kindness in schools. Taking that sort of mindset and putting it to the workforce, someone may come in and see, oh, you know what, this, my coworker Bill or Jane, they might see something where it's like, oh, it looks like the light's bugging you. You want me to turn that off for you?
Yeah.
Like, no big deal. No big, right? Like it's such a important thing to me. I've seen this, and I think it's hit and miss in some places, but in some daycares, I know our old daycare was like that. It was really good for that kind of stuff. They were able to make those accommodations. When we got into the schools, into kindergarten and stuff, kindergarten I didn't see it too much, but later on, grade 1 to 3, now it's much more obvious, but you still had to sort of fight to make teachers aware and do that sort of thing and advocate for it, hence the advocation part of this whole thing. But the how can I so actually, wait a minute, I just want to back up. I mean, you and I both agree on when it needs to start, whether it's daycare or whether it's preschool or kindergarten. Like that is where these things need to go. But is the one factor just normalizing this, or is it, hey, let's go after reading, let's go after dyslexia, let's go after dyscalculia, something like that? Would you say normalize these things first and then go after those? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. So my thing is, first of all, we need to normalize this, that all kids have different needs. Whether or not they have a diagnosis, all kids have different needs, and we should honor that. And if we honor every child, it is just going to become the way society is, right? Because those kids growing up are going to have a different experience than other kids. We have a bit of a different experience because mostly Isaac was unschooled. So we did not put in specific things to teach him to read. So when it became an issue in school, when he was in grade 3 and he wasn't reading yet, and he was going to have to wait a minimum of a year for any sort of testing, and he started hating going to school. Like up until that point, that kid loved school, hands down. He's such a social kid. Hands down, he loved school. And then he started hating it. And I would be like dragging him to school. And I'm just like, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to wreck our relationship over this. And that's what it was doing. We never did any sort of specific programming around him reading. What we did was take the pressure off. I read everything to him. I scribed for him. We did not pressure him at all. Within a few months, he was kind of reading bits and pieces over my shoulder, or he'd tell me what signs said on the side of the road or whatever. And I still kept the pressure off. Still, we did not put any sort of strategies in place other than we always read a lot together. Like I always read tons and tons and tons to him. And I always just still scribed for him. And then one day, about a year after we pulled him out of school, we were reading Percy Jackson. And I was kind of done reading. I've been reading for like an hour already. I'm like, I can't read anymore, buddy. I just can't. And he picked the book up and he said, "That's okay, Mom. I'm going to read to you now." And he opened that book up and he read to me. And then after that, he would read more and more often. He still reads out loud. He does not read. He calls it reading in his head. If you read silently, he still reads out loud. Somehow that helps him. And then he built on it. I never pushed anything. He built on it. When he was ready, he started watching anime. And he liked it in the original Japanese. You have to read subtitles. You have to read subtitles fast because you can't keep stopping them to read them. So he then sped up his reading on his own. And then he started to read manga online. Oh, it's a lot. Like there's a lot of reading. So he did it himself. We let him take the lead and he did it himself. I think what happens is, so we don't diagnose kids early to put early reading strategies in. Then we pressure them to read and we make it hard and then they don't want to do it anymore. And then they put up a block, right? So then it doesn't matter what kind of strategies you use then. They're already positive because they failed so many times at it that they can't do it and they don't want to try to do it, right? Kids are wired to learn. They're wired to learn. And then we put them in school and we bore them to tears, making them learn all this stuff that they find no use for in their life, that they're not interested in.
And they're learning just one way. They're learning one way, which is out of an antiquated system. That doesn't work for them.
Yeah. And we make
like
them
how many varieties of it's like you wouldn't tell a russet. Oh gosh, this is the weirdest one I'm ever going to make for an analogy. You wouldn't tell a russet potato you're a nugget potato.
Yeah.
How many potato types of potatoes are there? So why would we do it to a kid?
Yeah, and
or an adult for that matter.
What people forget is reading is actually not like a natural human thing. Like we've only been doing it for a very short amount of our history. Have we actually been reading? Right. So there are so many other things. Like as much as I don't think not reading is actually connected to the overdoses like people think it is. I think it is they didn't learn to read, but nobody gave them any other skills on top of that, right? Like it's a lack of skills, not just a lack of reading, because there's a lot of different ways to get information other than actually reading it with your eyes, right? Like I read with my eyes, but I also read with my ears. A friend of mine is blind. She reads with her fingertips. Like there's so many different ways to get information, but we're so focused on reading as the only way that can actually happen. There's tons and tons of successful people out there that cannot read, right? I know he's I know a guy, he's very successful, runs his own business, literally cannot decode letters at all or numbers. But he's so brilliant. He's found ways around it. And he owns his own multi-million-dollar business. So I don't think in and of itself, it's the not being able to read. I think it's the mindset that comes with it. It's the what is spoken into your life around not being able to read, and how we don't expect things from people if they can't read. Right? Like, I think it's more to do with that than not just not having the ability to read.
Well, and I think the other aspect to that as well is, when you're sort of robbed of that ability to learn to read that one way, right?
Yeah.
There's other ways for us to do it. I think it's really what's not being said is that, you didn't learn to read using your eyes or the traditional way that we would read words off a page. And so because you can't do that, you're essentially, I'm not sure if this is the right way to phrase this, but you're essentially that failure. And now you're more likely to go through depression, anxiety, and so forth. And now you're going to start to slide downhill. And because the services are what they are, it makes it that much harder to be able to pull out. And does that mean you end up as a more likelihood, homeless or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, without question. Without question, because again, like you and I both said, we're, it's just focused on one way.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I'm seeing other ways coming through in the schools. I'm very grateful for that. But it's still one of those things that I think we still got a long way to go on. The reading help on side of things, we do the same thing with O. A lot of the reading, it's like, you pick a book. He still like doesn't quite understand. He's getting better at understanding comic books, but it's still trying to explain how things sort of work. We know there's dyslexia in the mix. It's just more like where that sort of fits in, because we know the words and that kind of jump around on him, and he's said so as much. But even with video games, I remember growing up and playing something like The Legend of Zelda and reading the text on the screen, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever for reading homework, for practicing my own reading. And that made me fall in love sort of with stories. Owen has the same thing. It's, if I can sit there getting him to watch a video game, story, or we can watch something with like I always have the subtitles on the TV. Doesn't matter. They're not coming off, partly because the kids can get really loud. I think it's an awesome way to learn, because I can stop the movie at any time and be like, what are those letters? And we're watching a movie doing it. It goes to your point about not wrecking the relationship and building up, what's the word? It's building the relationship. It's creating a safe space for kids. And people, I think, discount it in this and say, you know what, all kids shouldn't be on the screen. They should be out there playing and doing this. I'm like, no, it's actually a perfectly valid tool to be on your iPad watching a movie and you've got subtitles on, or a TV show on Netflix. That may just be the way that somebody's learning. And don't sit there and pass judgment saying, oh, there's too much screen time and this and that. Whatever, it's not going to happen. Thank you for listening to the We Are the ADHD Family podcast. If you want to be a guest on the podcast or know someone who would make a great guest, my contact information is in the show notes. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated.
We are the ADHD family.